Tonight's author is a former curator of technology at the Autry Museum of the American West and is a consulting historian on railroad and Western history for numerous organizations. He is the co-author of Stagecoach, the Romantic Western Vehicle, which there are some stagecoach stories in here, correct? So tonight we welcome Jim Wilke. Please welcome. Let's give him a hand here.
Well, thank you, Michael.
So pleased to have you and the book. There's so many fascinating stories. I just started to take a look at it. I'm sure you have a lot, but I'm wondering, being a historian, what inspired you to put it all together in a book? And then I'm going to step away.
All right, okay. Excuse me. I'll be right here. Well, this entire project started many years ago when I was with the Autry Museum. I was ensconced in the American West. It's, sort of a significant time in the history of the United States and America. And I wondered what life was like for people like myself in the American frontier. And back then, nothing had been written on it. There were no special books. There were books on gay and lesbian history, but they focused primarily on people in the literature or the arts, or ultimately the rise of the modern gay civil rights movements. But very little elsewhere. Modern histories of the West, likewise, had very little about this, almost none. We were pretty much in a situation of looking for needles in a haystack. So that began my study, and that was the moment that I started to go through everything and started finding as much as I could. And in the end, I found 6 accounts. I settled on 6 accounts that take place in the American West over a period of a century, from the 1830s, when the American West was yet to be occupied by the United States, to the early 20th century. And we look at a time period which is both the West from wilderness to settled, and then for gay people, an environment which did not understand the identity of homosexuality at all. They were considered to be recalcitrant, wayward people, being stubborn or wicked or something, to having the sense of identity as a gay, lesbian, or transgender or bisexual person. And so we have these 2 things going on at the same period of time and in the same environment. And I thought that was profoundly interesting, and it was very interesting for me to talk about. Now, since that time, a number of books have come out by incredible scholars describing gay people in the American West. But these books primarily describe the classic studies of gender construction and so forth. And there's not many stagecoaches in them. I really am given naturally to the other side. So my work works as a complement. And there's a lot to be found primarily by looking at many of these details that are not available through other sources. So I'm pleased with that. I'll give you a little read here. In a century of American expansion into the lands of the West, the frontier landscape revealed frontiers of human existence, when the human condition reflected an unknown and open land. Ordinary Americans found themselves in an extraordinary place, where nature confronted humanity at a time when the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgendered people were as not yet defined and as yet open to exploration. On the surface, it seemed like paradise. The early frontier had little room for arbitrary conventions, and modern definitions of sexuality did not yet exist in any clear form. This fostered degrees of social latitude, especially in isolated regions and industries that allowed lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Westerners opportunities to engage life with something approaching equal footing. But in looking further, a far more complex picture emerges. The frontier could feel a paradise from the trammels of civilization, but moving into it inevitably brought the very symbolization many sought to avoid, building and reproducing nets of entanglements that would tamp these freedoms down for the rules and shush of civilized life. Over time, settlement and loss of wilderness made the standards of civilization, arbitrary or not, increasingly dominant in the West. At the same time, new developments in medical science were framing and marginalizing unconventional lives through pathological models. fencing off old latitudes in the process. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people were subsequently compelled to acknowledge these standards even as they sought to define their own identity. Because of this, the maelstrom of opportunities and conflicts that made up the West affected lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Westerners in intrinsically personal ways, uniquely critical to their success or survival. In Colorado, a postmistress faced arrest on insanity charges for defending her passion grand with another woman in 1889, while in California, a man working in isolated mining and lumber camps marveled at the masculine, hard-working men freely engaging each other and him without interference. She faced the full measure of civilization's wrath, while he was able to enjoy life freely in the distant mountains. For them, an open or closed West was no simple nuisance or convenience, but an essential key to the potential of their freedom of movement and identity. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Westerners put their own stamp on Western history, sometimes in surprising ways. Mrs. Noonan, a transgender military laundress hired by Elizabeth Custer to do her household's laundry, probably washed the blue wool shirt that George Custer wore to his death at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. Mrs. Noonan's devotion to the Custer command so impressed Elizabeth Custer that long after Mrs. Noonan's death and the subsequent discovery of her male body, she continued, that is, Mrs. Custer, to knowingly and deliberately describe her as a woman, and intentionally included Mrs. Noonan among the women she pictured as advancing the cause of civilization upon the West, a movement when, quote-unquote, all classes and conditions joined together, in Elizabeth Custer's description, to advance and uphold what they considered American progress. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because Mrs. Noonan could probably not care less about American progress. She's just living her own life. We know about that she loves. She's got a devoted military husband, and they are definitely a married pair in every sense. She is a hardworking laundress. She would tailor on the side, cook. She served as a midwife to Annie Yates, who was the wife of another 7th Cavalry officer, at Mrs. Custer's request.
Oh my gosh.
And one of her great passions is that she loved company balls. These are the dances, the hops that the military would put on in the middle of winter. You're in Fort Abraham Lincoln. You're on the Missouri River in Dakota Territory in 1870s. It's cold. It's very cold in the winter, and these are their only forms of entertainment because warfare had seasons. You only fought wars in the summer, or usually. Well, she would go to these dances dressed in her big outfit. She loved to sew. Mrs. Custer described her as silk and woolen stuffs for gowns. She described her wearing a pink tarlatan ball dress. And that notwithstanding her height and colossal anatomy, she had constant partners. So she would do this, but it was later reported by people in 1877 that she would wear sometimes up to 3 different outfits over the night of a ball. Now, think about that. The logistics. She comes in, ta-da, she makes her entrance. She has this fantasy of being the belle of the ball. And she then sneaks out the back, goes back to her quarters, lights the lamp, unhooks the dress, finds another dress, picks out which one she wants to do, hooks herself back up, extinguishes the lamp, goes over across the fort in the middle of a Dakota winter. Snow and mud, frozen mud, happily, and then makes another entrance. And then she does this yet another time. I mean, I think that's really sweet. I think you can see sometimes there is a naive, beautiful quality that some people had, and for her, it was the nature of being this party animal, a sort of a cavalry party animal. And because her normal life was working with the wash tubs, and wash dresses, and lye and soap, and everything else. And so these are really wonderful moments for her. This book examines this experience through 6 accounts of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender life in the American frontier. It is not a typical work from the field of gender studies, and in fact is probably not a work of gender studies at all. It's more of a bridge between Western studies and gender studies, interweaving one with the other, with an emphasis on basic biographical and background detail. Now I'd like to read a little bit about Claire Dietrich. The mad infatuation of a Colorado postmistress in 1889 is remarkable, not just for her love for another woman, but also her insistence that love for another woman was both natural to her path in life and spiritual, her being's destiny. Claire Dietrich had developed a conscious sense of self as an inherently lesbian woman, a recognition that came not from Budapest or Vienna, but instead from an ordinary postmistress in the Rocky Mountain West. Moreover, she sought to fit this identity into the aggressively Victorian society that surrounded her. For Dietrich, what modern scholars describe as the 19th century invention of homosexuality was simply a recognition of natural phenomena, similar to the inventions of gravity, baleen whales, or plate tectonics. This perception came independently. She was not influenced by any of the great thinkers of her day, nor would she have heard, much less conceived, of bizarre terms such as urning, invert, and so on. I would add, too, that lesbian was known at the time, and there are many popular lesbian ladies' clubs. But those referred to middle-class clubs of ladies that were that pretended to the arts, and was not lesbian as we know it. So the society knew the word, but they didn't affiliate it in the modern sense. In place of classical nomenclature or philosophical somersaults, she simply concluded that this was her natural path in life, in effect, how she was. At the same time, she framed this view with a sense of destiny and purpose, a being's destiny, curiously sympathetic with the heroic middle-class Victorian grandeur of the allegories, operas, and stage dramas that formed her society's idea of high art. Her love poems to Ora Chatfield were quoted, and badly, from Shakespeare. And in fact, she said a love poem from Othello. No, not Othello. Another one, and it's completely wrong. She does not get it at all. You can tell that she read a book that had little snippets of things. She had never read the entire thing. King Lear. It was from King Lear. And it's false flattery by one of King Lear's daughters to win over the old man and his lute. And she's quoting this in a love poem to Ora. More than eyes can wield the matter, beyond all that is riches and fair, beyond eyesight, dearer than liberty and space, I do love thee. She has no idea what that means, but she's sending it. And they would take bits and pieces of appropriate, approved culture and put that into their lives because that was what they viewed as the thing to do. Their elopement that summer, and Claire Dietrich and Ora Chatfield did elope later that year, echoed the plot of a melodramatic opera which had played at Wheeler's Opera House in Aspen that spring. Their emotional turmoil in eloping would have also echoed an aria from La Valle, a genuine opera of the same period as the heroine steels herself to run off with her lover. Now, that's being an opera, she falls down a glacier, and that's the end of it. The society that Dietrich encountered from day to day had little conception of this, even if it unwittingly influenced it. Despite its Rocky Mountain isolation, Aspen, bustling with mine shafts and railroads and graced by Sabbath schools, had become a deliberate regional mirror for the prejudices, society, and culture of the East. They had no concept of lesbian women, and concluded instead that Dietrich's loneliness had simply directed her natural affections into the wrong direction, something that could be remedied, if not by reason, then by time at an insane asylum at Pueblo. Within the stability, cultivation, and order of this outer world, Claire Dietrich was inwardly embracing and outwardly proclaiming a life created by ancient genetic codes that were, in 1889, only just being recognized by science, a majestic force beyond the conception of her society and perhaps barely at the edges of her own. If an ordinary postmistress in a mountain town was capable of recognizing herself in this way, far from the European circles of thought, it seems highly unlikely that she was a singular exception. The most striking aspect of Claire Dietrich's story may not be its existence, but rather its preservation. The fact that we know of a woman who figured it out for herself, evidence of the presence and ability of people to understand and advocate for themselves within and despite the boundaries of a culture long since departed.
Interesting.
Now, I can stop that here, or if there's
Keep
any questions,
going.
or would you like me to read a little more?
Yeah. Please do.
All right. Well, the ladies have had their turn, so I'm going to give something for the gentlemen. And this is the afterword, and this is a story which was told to me at a gay bar in Oklahoma City in 1989 or 90 when I was with the Gay Rodeo. I was part of the Golden State Gay Rodeo Association, and we were playing in Oklahoma City. And it was a great time, really great. And I met this guy, Keith was his name, and he told me a story of being in a gay bar in Oklahoma City in the 1950s and running into two working cowboys from Texas. And this is that story. On a fine evening, sometime in the late 1950s, two cowboys stood against the counter of a gay bar in Oklahoma City, having a drink. They were working cowboys, employed at a ranch in Texas, and had driven over 100 or more miles up from Texas to be there that night. The Mayflower Bar wasn't much, something of a dive, with paneled walls stained from cigarette smoke and stale beer, and a jukebox alternating viciously between Johnny Horton and Peggy Lee. His crowd was diverse, from motorcycle men to regular Joes to lesbian women, the woman having become famous for fighting off and badly injuring a gang of football players who had come there to harass them one night. People who went there knew they risked harassment from police raids as well, but it was a gay bar in the American West during a deeply prejudiced era, and its reputation had spread by word of mouth across state lines and even onto distant ranches. One of the two cowboys at the Mayflower Bar remained silent. The other talked a bit, remarking that in Texas, in the ranching country they came from, there were from usually 2 to 3 homosexually active cowboys on a given ranch. They recognized each other silently and kept this information among themselves. In the Texas ranching lands where the XIT and the Matador once reigned, the ability to remain quiet and undemonstrative was as much about survival as it was about trust, as it meant laying a foundation for a network of careful support among gay people in the ranching country, in effect, paralleling the requirements of survival in the frontier wilderness. They used the language of their working world to shape, express, and protect their personal world. By employing a degree of reticence common among ranchers as a whole, they were able to slowly, and even more important, safely, recognize and identify each other while simultaneously gauging each other's ability to keep their counsel, demonstrating that they were cautious, trustworthy, and safe to be around. It was the key to opening the door into a hidden society. People who take up stock raising adopt very specific sets of requirements necessary for the work, honed by hard-earned, practical, and unforgiving experience. The safety of the herd and their investment in the herd was the all-important factor, followed by their own safety and that of their horses. In times of danger, veteran rancher Granville Stewart wrote, "Every man would sacrifice his life to protect the herd." Montana cowboy Edward Abbott, who married Stewart's daughter, added that they worked as much, if not more, for their own reputation as for that of their brand, earning a place among their fellows. Everyone had to do their part, and courage was expected at all times. Lack of sleep while on night guard, alkali dust, hailstorms that dented saddles, and rain that soaked to the skin were all part of the job. "It's hell," wrote Abbott after an 18-hour day in 1888, "but it's for Diamond M, and don't you forget it." This quality of life informed the way the two Texas cowboys at the Mayflower Bar conducted themselves, both as ranchers and as gay men. They might have come from the high and rolling plains in the Texas Panhandle, or the plains and hill country of central Texas, following the old cattle trails northward and then crossing the Red River on their way to Oklahoma City. From either one of these locales to the Oklahoma state line, and then from the state line to Oklahoma City, might be from 200 to 300 miles or more. By the 1950s, this distance had been easily tamed by improvements in highways, cars, and trucks, which were equally critical into providing the two men with a measure of safety in event of trouble in Oklahoma City. In case of a bar raid, the intervening counties and jurisdictions piled up like sandbags on either side of the state line, in itself a kind of moat, effectively insulating them from any chance of the news reaching their home range. Writing in the 1940s, Dr. Alfred Kinsey found that the ease of engagement among older generations there's a generational difference here. Older men had come of age before the influence of medical science had recognized and established the homosexual as a type. So for them, engaging each other wasn't necessarily considered homosexuality as such, and accordingly did not possess a stigma. Younger men, in contrast, appeared to be growing wary of anything that hinted of the unusual, especially as the homosexual became an absolute and derogative classification in popular culture, bringing a prejudicial taint with personal risk to any form of bond outside of a specific and safe set of norms. As early as 1924, a straight Arizona cowboy recalled being warned about an otherwise ordinary man who was pausing at their camp for the night at the Big Tank in Arizona's Tonto Basin. Although he later questioned this advice, he nonetheless stayed on the opposite side of the campfire, just in case. I kept my eye out for the cowboy Dell had talked about, he recalled, and when I was introduced to him, I couldn't see he looked much different from anyone else, unless maybe he was dressed a little better than most. I still felt uneasy about him, and managed to stay on the opposite side of the fire all evening. Dell's gossip had sufficiently planted the seed of doubt and subsequently shaped a stranger's welcome. I think we'll just cut it there and leave that here. If there's any questions or anything I could do, or I'll hand it over to Michael.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, no, please
How
start a
do you
discussion.
get all of your information? Like you were saying, you were speaking to that man who said he had the information of the cowboys in the bar. Like, how do you gather and do research? What are your methods?
Well, that was a lucky strike.
Yeah.
That was a very lucky strike. And I think it's an important one too, because it describes a shift from the 19th century philosophy to the present day, and how people now see themselves as both, as Westerners as well. The first account that I have of William Stewart in the American West, Scotland, is well known, has been written about twice. And I included it in part from what it says, but also because I had a sort of a personal connection to it through my colleagues with the Autry. And I really wanted to sort of give it a picture of that. I also had some ideas about his character. Very few of these people are entirely heroic. They're all human. And it was interesting to sort of put that into place. The Charlie Parkhurst, who makes up the second chapter, is a stagecoach driver. He's very well known, a transgender man, drove stagecoaches. But none of the histories of Parkhurst really get into his staging world, the types of stagecoaches he drove, or the routes that he took, and who he knew. And I really wanted to, so I just sort of dug into that. It turns out that it was extraordinary. Parkhurst lived right next door to a survivor of the Donner Party at one point. One of his stage routes took him to the rancho of John Fremont, at the time that Fremont was the first presidential candidate for the newly formed Republican Party. So everyone knows one another. His boss, Charlie Parkhurst's boss, later died, the staging boss, James Birch, later died on a ship called the Central America, which is the famous ship of gold that sank and was recently uncovered and excavated. It sort of sank in the middle of a hurricane in 1857. You see a lot of things like that, and then there's some really pleasurable things. Charlie Parkhurst's other boss had the distinction of being the first man that I have ever found to be the victim of a drive-by shooting. A 300-pound lady in a carriage drove up emptied the contents of a pepper box at him, missed, and drove off. There's a lot of wonderful things in there.
Yeah.
Where did you get stories like that? That's just.
You just, you go into it. I mean, one of the great things is that Parkhurst had one of the best accounts of Parkhurst is from a man who knew him, who had first met Parkhurst when Parkhurst was working for a stable in Providence, Rhode Island in the 1840s and 50s. And he then ran into Parkhurst in Sacramento in 1853 when Parkhurst was driving stages for Jim Birch in the California Stage Company. In early 1854, he met him again, this time on board a steamship, which was going from San Francisco to Nicaragua, then crossing the Isthmus, and then boarding another steamship up to New York. And James Birch, head of the California Stage Company, and Parkhurst were going together back to New York City on the vessel, and this man was here with him. And we know his account as well because his account holds up. And to me personally, the image of Parkhurst walking the decks of this giant sidewheel steamer off the coast of California is really wonderful, is absolutely wonderful. And it turns out that the cabin of that vessel also had, on other voyages, we have John Fremont as well as a man named Theodore Judah, who was a surveyor and would survey a little thing called the Pacific Railroad.
Yeah.
So there's a small sense of world, but it was also, a lot of it was about the sense of California in the 1850s and 60s. But I think too, there's a sense of stubbornness, and Parkhurst did not want anyone he just wanted to live his own life.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to live his own life by his own terms. And, so he was reticent, he was protective of himself, but he was also, very highly regarded. And he was popular, he was great at telling stories. He said it was good as going to a circus, to sit behind the seat beside him, hearing him talk. That's what his associate recalled. The head of the stage line from San Juan Bautista to Santa Barbara in Los Angeles said that knew him and thought that he was a champion, just a great, great person. So he had a very solid, positive reputation. He retired and started farming. He rented some acres of land in the Santa Cruz area. And it turned out that this land, owned once by a Mexican family, parts of it had been sold off, and there were claims on the land by a German fiscal adventurer. We'll call him that. There's other words that are much more to the point. Fiscal adventurer is a good one. And basically, he wanted, he basically filed a lawsuit against Parkhurst because he claimed the land for himself. Even though it was rented, Parkhurst had no interest in land beyond the 2 inches. But he stayed in a lawsuit with Frederick Heen, the German adventurer, for the rest of his life. And he staunched this man all of his life, and he just basically would not be taken advantage of. When he died in the last days of 1879, his body was found, and the news call came out. It basically said what everyone already knew. Everyone already knew it. They already knew it in Providence, Rhode Island. They knew it in California. The people in Castroville thought he was a woman dressing up like a man, and they never said a word. Primarily because they would have been obliged to act on it if they had. And so it was just easier to talk privately and let him be himself, which is a very California thing to do.
Yeah.
But there was someone else who said something really quite remarkable, and I'd like to read this here because this is so modern. I mean, this is written by a newspaper editor in Sacramento in January 1880. So just picture Sacramento. If you've ever been there, it's got brick buildings and iron, cast iron storefronts and very Victorian ornate. It was the head of the largest railroad on the Pacific coast. Steamships and steamboats were coming in. Railroads, your whistles and horses and the clatter of life. And this man is talking about all this. And he said, there you go. If the story of Parkhurst is true, it will add another and particularly consistent and well-rounded instance to the catalog of abnormally masculine women. In such a case, it is evident that the masculine character is present in the fullest sense, and that the physical marks of sex are scarcely more than abortive developments. Such a woman, he concluded, is very much more of a man than anything else, and in adopting male clothing and habits, she only obeys the laws of her nature, which is, in such cases, no doubt the safest guide. That's pretty nice. I think that's
Yeah.
really great. But here we'll end it on a spiritual side. Bartholomew Moore, who had known Parkhurst from Providence, had sailed with Parkhurst on the steamboat, had traveled with Parkhurst, said, he conceived of Parkhurst as something of a mystery, but in a more spiritual way. Moore had known Parkhurst personally since 1848, had sat beside him on stages, and had once traveled with him by sea for several weeks. As far as Moore was concerned, Parkhurst's existence was from origins less of biology and science than the divine. To Moore, Parkhurst might be conceived of as a spiritual, mysterious spiritual entity, something that inhabited and fulfilled the corporeal body. Parkhurst was a kind of indefinable spiritual experience, contained within and manifestly different from the dull flesh. At the end of Charlie Parkhurst's life, Moore later wrote, what was called Charlie Parkhurst died, and an unknown woman was buried in a lone grave, where life and death will forever be a mystery.
Wow. That's great.
That's great.
One
So-
other question.
Yeah.
In your five stories, I think, of
6.
different people, you were very careful to have confirmation of their gayness in one way or another. The last chapter on the lumberjack, everybody knew that they were gay.
Yeah.
I think it was Breckenridge.
Breckenridge, yes.
There's no
There doesn't really have to be.
solid confirmation until you get all the way to the end.
Yeah.
And that guy says, well, I knew him. There's a quote.
Yeah.
You knew Billy, I knew Billy.
He's a nice young girl then.
Right.
Undoubtedly is a nice old lady now. That is a great letter. It's from Fred Dodge, who was a Wells Fargo detective in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. And he and Fred Klum, who was the former mayor of Tombstone, were writing each other. They were old men by that point. You know,
Yes,
they were nostalgic about their West. They were nostalgic about their youth. And it was interesting because in the 19th century, the 1880s were considered a horribly modern period. And so all of this Wild West and the gunfights and all of that, they didn't want to talk about that at the time. They wanted it to go away. They wanted to make the place safe for investments, you know, so that people would come in. That, I mentioned that several times in that chapter. But at Breckenridge, you know, they're gossiping about him. You know, they're basically exchanging each other Christmas greetings to each other and their wives. They talk about so-and-so. They talk about their friend Wyatt Earp. They talk about this. Breckenridge had written a book called El Dorado, which he tells the side of the world, but he's not that.
Open.
No, he's not that nice about Wyatt Earp. He kind of keeps a sort of a cool quality, and they were clearly on the side of Wyatt Earp, and so there was a little bit of that going on, which they.
I was fascinated when that part, because out of those guys gossiping, they wrote contesting books and memoirs of this, out of which the whole movie industry developed.
Stuart Lake,
and
Wyatt Earp, Frontier
Breckenridge's
Marshal.
partner could spin a gun. And how many times have you seen that in the movie? I swear they must have gotten that.
Oh, Curly
right
Bill
off.
Brocious? Yeah.
Yeah.
What we do know is that Breckenridge is something interesting. He had interest in he mentions two particular men of interest. One was literally the son of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was traveling through Colorado with his partner in the early 1870s at Manitou. And he drove them around for a while and everything like that. and he saw this wonderful world where people like him could be really well to do and everything like that. And the other one was precisely on the opposite side of the spectrum. William Curly Bill Brocious. William Brocious, Curly Bill, a tall, outlaw, quite literally a rustler, particularly a notorious person. But he had a lot of affection for him. He considered him more honest than many of the so-called honest people of Tombstone. And I think Brocious was told to have a liking for Breckenridge in return. We don't know if they had a relationship or not. We know that Breckenridge really liked him.
But you do have confirmation from other people saying that he was gay, right?
Oh yeah, everyone, the whole town knew.
Yeah.
But,
She asked, where do you get your So you boiled the whole West down to 5 or 6 people.
No, these are 6 accounts are only a tip of a much larger story.
Yeah, but there are no other documented stories that are out there.
Oh, there are tons of them.
No, where it's clearly that they're gay and other people.
Oh, tons.